Hello, you've joined us for a special discussion on Budget 2011, its impact and the verdict of what corporate India thought of what Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee said in his budget. I'm Pranjal Sharma. We're going to be discussing a special survey that we have done to look at what exactly corporate India wanted, expected and finally got. We have with us in this discussion Kavita Gupta, Director Insights at Penn Schoen Berland, the company that did the research with us, Mr. Arun Duggal, former head of Bank of America in India and now the chairman of Shriram Capital, and Anil Padmanabhan, Deputy Managing Editor of Mint newspaper. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Let me begin with you, Kavita. Can you give us a quick insight into the survey? What was expected by the corporate world and what you finally saw?
When we started talking to the people, we figured out that the concern was mostly around the running issues like corruption, inflation, etc. And in fact, after the survey, when we met them again, we figured out that yes, they were happy with what Finance Minister has presented, and almost 70% were saying that the budget met their expectations.
We'll go into more details of that, but as part of our analysis, PSB had done this survey with Bloomberg UTV and amongst the corporate leaders to figure out how India Inc. had rated the budget, and here are the results of what we got from the CEOs. The poll asked three basic questions. Did the budget 2011-12 meet the expectations? And 69% said, as you can see on your screen, that it met their expectations. 31% said that it did not meet their expectations. Now, the other question that we asked was a very fairly simple thing, to get a dipstick survey into what the mind of the CEOs were on the ranking and rating of the budget. And as you can see on the screen, most of the people were actually positive about it, though there were a few people who felt that not enough has been done by the budget. The ranking was fairly low, but the average figure that we get on a scale of 1 to 10 is about 7. That's where 7 and 8, actually 6 to 8 is the range where most people have ranked the budget. The other big question that we asked is how would they sort of describe the budget? And again, what we've got is that not many felt, only about 20% felt that it was a growth-oriented budget. Most people felt that it was a please-all budget. 30% felt. 11% also felt that it was a political budget. It was not really something which industry can be feeling very warm about. At some level of contradiction we see over there while the ranking is high, but at the same time when the description is asked for, it looks like that it's not as good as it was. So let me ask Anil about this. Anil, do you see a contradiction when you see the ranking is a bit high, but actually when you go and ask them to describe it, it comes down to something which is less charitable?
See, just quickly eyeballing your survey, like you said right up front, muted expectations ahead of the budget. And then on top of the muted expectations, 70% say it's a good budget. But the real bad news for the finance minister, 30% said it's a really bad budget. You tag the two together, that in a muted expectation, 70% believe it's a good budget. So it's the unsaid part of this survey from Indian industry, I'm sure they won't say it on record, is that this budget is a bad budget.
Why is it that you are saying that the expectations were very low?
See, the run-up to the budget, there were 3 things which had to be fixed, 4 rather. Growth, jobs creation linked to it, inflation management and governance. I don't think this budget answered any of these 4, and worse, it has left an inflationary potential in the budget with 11,500 crore indirect tax levies built into it.
Mr. Duggal, how would you see it? Were the expectations as low as the figures tend to suggest right now?
I think so. I think not only this budget, but over the years, I think corporate India has sort of gotten used to it, that this is a big hoopla about the budget, but they really don't expect anything dramatic, except in their narrow industry. They may want some tax rebates, some concessions, etc.
But the reason expectations is a factor of the fact that budget is a statement of intent of your year's political policy, for your economic policy, and last couple of years and definitely the last few months we've seen a lot of negative agenda dominating the government's attention and of course the headlines as well. And the hope was, especially after the Prime Minister said that you will see the next phase of reforms in the budget. So when the Prime Minister says that you will see it, did you see that next wave of economic reforms in the budget, even an intent, a statement of intent?
Let me just go back to one point regarding expectations. We've been through budgets years after year. But nobody after a year, no finance minister has come and said, here's my report card. This is what I said I will do, and this is what has happened. So many of these statements end up being just statements, and nothing more happens. Now, as far as the reform agenda is concerned, I'm actually a bit positive about that. I see that certain new direction is being taken, particularly direct cash transfer that the finance minister talked about, reduction in subsidies that he talked about. I was pleased to hear that GST is on track. So in some of these ways, I see that the reform agenda is continuing. His concern about drop in FDI and wanting to do something there also was very positive.
Kavita, before we take a break, quickly, in terms of a sectoral divide on expectations and of course how they were met, is there a sort of pattern you see there?
Yeah, basically, if we look at services sector, they seem to be a little more optimistic than manufacturing. That was the observation. And of course, the way it's expanding, I think going forward, the expectations from finance minister was to continue growth, and I think that point has been met at some level. So that's why when we did post-budget survey, the result was, it is meeting our expectation, or it looks like a little bit of growth.
So we'll come to that in a while, and we'll also look at the fact that one of the very interesting insights we got in the survey was that despite all the negative news preceding the budget, and of course not a very warm budget from what the expectations were, a lot of companies feel that they will continue to invest and put their money in fresh investments. We'll talk about that, and of course we'll bring you some industry heads and some voices who are assessing the budget, and they will tell us how they feel, and our panel of course remains with us to analyze the impact of the expectations. You joined us for a special discussion on corporate India's expectations from the budget. We're calling it the verdict. Now we've seen how corporate India has rated the budget. Now let's hear some of the voices that we spoke to earlier.
MAT has been a source of complaint from our side, because when you are paying MAT at an effective rate of over 19%, when the total corporate tax rate is 33%. I think it is very high. At this, while you are giving exemption on the one hand, the other hand you are essentially taking it out.
Now let's take a look at some of the expectations which we had been talking about. Anil, who's with us, was saying that the expectations were fairly low from the budget. Mr. Duggal also said the same thing, but very interesting fact, when we asked them, PSB asked them about the survey, what were the key challenges for the Indian economy, close to 50% said that corruption and poor governance, and actually if you combine corruption and poor governance, they dominate the challenge for the Indian economy. It was very surprising that it was not low credit or high cost of credit, low liquidity, or in fact poor infrastructure. It was really corruption and poor governance which dominated the perception of the key challenges. Let me put this to our panel as well right now, Mr. Duggal. That's a very interesting development, that the industry looks at corruption as a bigger issue than anything else.
I think so. I think what we have seen is, over the last year or so, scandal after scandal, disappointment after disappointment. And that does impact industry, does impact the mood, it does impact countries' reputation as a destination for foreign direct investment. So it is a major concern. It continues to be a major concern. And in this area, I don't know if budget was the right place to address it, but the government has not done enough.
But he did mention that we want to improve governance, and he's talked about transparency in at least the tax administration.
That is true. That is true. But it seems so little in face of an issue which is so important in the minds of corporate India, that I would rate this as a major disappointment that nothing is being done. But I hasten to add that budget probably isn't the only place to address it. I think the government has to come out and say that yes, we understand this thing, that this is a major problem, and we are going to do this, this, and this to deal with this issue.
Anil, roadmap for improved governance, as Mr. Duggal says, perhaps budget is not the right place to do it, but given the background and the events leading up to the budget, was it important for the government to lay out very clear norms of transparency, especially in allocation of government or national resources, as it were?
Absolutely. I'll differ with Mr. Duggal on this because the circumstances required that something proactive had to be done by the government. And just to add to what he said, talk is cheap as far as this budget shows. They're just recycling a lot of old proposals. The bigger cost is there is a cost that Indian industry is paying. So if you talk to entrepreneurs, one of them in Bangalore told me about how India is losing out to Philippines primarily because there is no governance, so law and order, so you have to transport your people for outsourcing. You have to provide your own electricity. You have to provide your own infrastructure for food. So end result, Philippines, this is taken for granted, and that's governance. So I'm not surprised that 70-80% of your people are complaining of governance because it's beginning to hurt Indian business, so which is why they're concerned.
And another interesting insight, we'll go to the next big question that we asked, what should have been the main priority for Finance Minister in the budget? And we found, as you can see on the graph, again, it was not infrastructure, it was really that the government should be focusing on reforming and boosting the agriculture and food sector. Now, again, that is clearly food inflation and the impact of that on the entire growth agenda for the country is weighing very heavy on the minds of corporate India CEOs. These are the wealth creators, and of course, these are the ones who create jobs for the country. Kavita, a quick sort of sense from you on this one, when we talk about agri and food sector as the main focus of reforms. Again, can you give us a sense of what the pattern of thought was?
Yeah, basically when you look at the growth of the country, and this is a country which depends a lot on agriculture, so of course that becomes an area where intervention is required. But also look at industrial growth, which has come up as the topmost second option. And we talked about what are their plans in future. So when you combine the two, so they are optimistic, they have expansion plans, and they are expecting industrial growth as given push by Finance Minister in the budget. So I think if we look at all these three things together, so it clearly tells us what is the clear picture.
Now let's also look at the kind of growth which the companies talked about and the kind of growth that they expected from the economy, and this was 52% actually felt that it should be 7 to 8% of growth, which was fairly expected, and it's quite in sync with what Finance Minister also has been talking about. But let me ask Mr. Duggal over here, food sector reforms was thought to be the key area of reforms for the government. Did the budget take adequate measures to tackle that big monster?
No, it didn't. I think at the back of mind of corporate India is an issue which is inflation, the corrosive impact it can have on the society, young people. Last year, Finance Minister spoke a lot about financial inclusion, but not much has happened in that area. So this discontentment and looking at what's happening around us in the world is a latent concern that people have, much more than whether we're going to put another factory or change this or that. The corrosive effect of inflation, lack of governance, corruption is top of the mind concern now.
Right, we'll take a break here, but let's leave you with this graphic on despite all the negative news Indian economy, a lot of people still feel that they're going to be putting out fresh investments as well. If they are fairly confident about the growth numbers, and they're also saying that we will be putting in more money to expand. We'll come back and look at those figures once more.